time. The time has come, the walrus said.
I was going to add
To talk of things. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another thrilling adventure with the Isolated Literary Society presents Daily Austen. Better. All right. Thank you for being prompt, SD and Michelle, I assume. Oh, Michelle, you can tell Nick I worked on quicksand for a little bit today. I'm very excited about it, actually. Finally, there's a cover that was requested in the past, like 3 weeks ago. I'm finally getting around to working on it.
Gotcha.
It's a David Bowie song.
Okay.
I was not intimately familiar with it. Okay, well, no, there's just one person down from two, so maybe it wasn't Esty and Michelle. I don't know who it is now. Oh, it is Michelle. Okay, Michelle's there. Well, at any rate, trying to kill a minute or two at the top so that we can give people a chance to get their notifications. Well, see, now it says there's 0 people watching, so I don't know if I can trust YouTube. I hope that doesn't mean that we're having some kind of technical problems that I'm unaware of. I don't know. If you are, in fact, watching the video right now, live, please say something in the chat so I know that YouTube is lying to me about the viewer numbers. I will text Esty just in case she is not here. Pepper, do you mind?
It's like, yes, I do.
Oh, okay. So, Michelle is still here. Oh, I wonder if that's like if you shrink the window, but you're still listening, if it will take you off of the viewer numbers or something. Seems weird.
That does seem weird.
You'll still leave it. The person's still listening to the audio if they're not watching the video. That's half of it. All right. Well, that's silly. All right. Yeah, nothing else to report. No other important news. Minutes from the previous meeting.
we should totally keep minutes.
Yeah. I have nothing else to report to kill time before we start.
We could all do stretches.
Yeah. Carolyn's doing some good stretches. I in fact could use some stretches as well. Everybody, if you've been sitting down all day, do some quick stretches, maybe like roll your shoulders. I spent almost the entire day sitting at my computer, staring at the screen, watching other people who had been live streaming in the past as part of training for a new job. So that was
that's exciting.
A little tedious considering it's
like watching other people play a game, but not as fun.
No, not nearly as fun. Especially because, well, I won't get into it, but
yeah.
All right, now that we've had a little shoulder roll, a little bit of a stretch, my sister has had ample time to see my my text and show up in the video. Okay. Good. Michelle, I'm glad you enjoyed the stretches. I used to do that about midway when I was doing the Pride and Prejudice readings. I would always end up with my back hurting, and I'd stand up mid reading and do a little stretch. So maybe I should.
Because you had the setup that was like hard on your back.
I think it partially was that, although I think it was two different
you
places.
Didn't have this like.
That's true. I didn't have this nice situation. Ensemble. Oh, okay. Esty's been here since 6 on the dot. Well, excuse me. YouTube says there's only one person watching, so I had no idea, and you didn't say anything.
The audacity.
I apologize for calling you out. All right.
YouTube should be apologizing for not counting her as a person.
What the hell, YouTube?
I know, right?
Okay. Well, apparently this is good to know that now I know that if people are watching the live stream and they like minimize the screen and because they just want to listen, they don't need to look at my face because who does? Then it will say that they're not watching. So that's good to know. Okay. Enough of that. Let's get on with chapter 43. And hopefully it will not be quite as long as 42 was. Oh, yes. It's time. It's time for the picnic at Box Hill. Very excited.
Wow. Okay.
Some stuff is about to go down, you guys. I remember how this if how this scene has played out in the movies is similar to how it plays out in the book. We'll find out. Okay. They had a very fine day for Box Hill, and all the other outward circumstances of arrangement, accommodation, and punctuality were in favor of a pleasant party. Mr. Weston directed the whole, officiating safely between Hartfield and the vicarage, and everybody was in good time. Emma and Harriet went together, Miss Bates and her niece with the Eltons, the gentleman on horseback. Mrs. Weston remained with Mr. Woodhouse. Nothing was wanting but to be happy when they got there. 7 miles were traveled in expectation of enjoyment, and everybody had a burst of admiration on first arriving. But in the general amount of the day, there was deficiency. There was a languor, a want of spirits, a want of union, which could not be got over. They separated too much into parties. The Eltons walked together. Mr. Knightley took charge of Miss Bates and Jane, and Emma and Harriet belonged to Frank Churchill. Interesting turn of phrase there. Oh, it started muted on your end or my end? Presumably you guys can hear me now since you've been reacting to what I'm saying. You said something about it was muted at the beginning. Well, good to know that you can hear me now. Sorry, there was a fly. Anyway, where was I? Yes, Emma and Harriet belonged to Frank Churchill.
Yes.
And Mr. Weston tried in vain to make them harmonize better. It seemed at first an accidental division, but it never materially varied. Mr. and Mrs. Elton indeed showed no unwillingness to mix and be as agreeable as they could, but during the 2 whole hours that were spent on the hill, there seemed a principle of separation between the other parties, too strong for any fine prospects, or any cold collation, or any cheerful Mr. Weston to remove. At first it was downright dullness to Emma. She had never seen Frank Churchill so silent and stupid. He said nothing worth hearing, looked without seeing, admired without intelligence, listened without knowing what she said. While he was so dull, it was no wonder that Harriet should be dull likewise, and they were both insufferable.
Yes, that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how annoying when the person who usually flatters you doesn't anymore.
How rude of Frank Churchill to not be in a good mood so Emma can have a nice day.
Yeah.
She doesn't express any concern over him, right?
Yeah.
She's not like, oh gosh, I hope he's okay. He seems really stressed or worried about something like you might feel about a friend. Instead, she's just like, oh, I've never seen him so silent and stupid.
Yes.
He's not even listening to me when I talk.
He's not flirting with me anymore.
How do? Sorry. When they all sat down, it was better. To her taste, a great deal better. For Frank Churchill grew talkative and gay, making her his first subject. Yes, that would be better to her taste.
Yes.
Every distinguishing attention that could be paid was paid to her. To amuse her and be agreeable in her eyes seemed all that he cared for, and Emma, glad to be enlivened, not sorry to be flattered, was gay and easy too, and gave him all the friendly encouragement, the admission to be gallant, which she had ever given in the first and most animating period of their acquaintance, but which now, in her own estimation, meant nothing, though in the judgment of most people looking on, it must have had such an appearance as no English word but flirtation can very well describe. Mr. Frank Churchill and Miss Woodhouse flirted together excessively. That's put in quotes, as if this is what some other person might say about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
They were laying themselves open to that very phrase, and to having it sent off in a letter to Maple Grove by one lady, to Ireland by another. Not that Emma was gay and thoughtless from any real felicity. It was rather because she felt less happy than she had expected. She laughed because she was disappointed, and though she liked him for his attentions, and thought them all, whether in friendship, admiration, or playfulness, extremely judicious, they were not winning back her heart. She still intended him for her friend. "How much I am obliged to you," said he, "for telling me to come today. If it had not been for you, I should certainly have lost all the happiness of this party. I had quite determined to go away again." "Yes, you were very cross, and I do not know what about, except that you were too late for the best strawberries. I was a kinder friend than you deserved, but you were humble. You begged hard to be commanded to come." "Don't say I was cross. I was fatigued. The heat overcame me." "It is hotter today." "Not to my feelings. I am perfectly comfortable today." "You are comfortable because you are under command." "Your command? Yes." Perhaps I intended you to say so, but I meant self-command. You had, somehow or other, broken bounds yesterday, and run away from your own management. But today you are got back again, and as I cannot always be with you, it is best to believe your temper under your own command, rather than mine. It comes to the same thing. I can have no self-command without a motive. You order me whether you speak or not, and you can always be with me. You are always with me. Dating from 3 o'clock yesterday, my perpetual influence could not begin earlier, or you would not have been so much out of humor before. 3 o'clock yesterday. That is your date. I thought I had seen you first in February. Your gallantry is really unanswerable. But, lowering her voice, nobody speaks except ourselves, and it is rather too much to be talking nonsense for the entertainment of 7 silent people. I say nothing of which I am ashamed, replied he, with lively impudence. I saw you first in February. Let everybody on the hill hear me if they can. Let my accent swell to Mickleham on one side and Dorking on the other. I saw you first in February.
Yes, that's...
Dorking, that's where Newton Pulsifer's mom lives.
Oh, yes, uh-huh.
I just remember because I heard he said it when I watched in the last episode, which we just watched like 2 days ago.
In a few places. I've heard it mentioned in various British things. It seems to always be mentioned as like a small town or something. Yeah,
presumably it is. I just think when people want to like name a funny town, they pick that.
Well,
Dorking.
It's there's a town in Scotland called Dull.
That's true. That's funny in a different way.
Which the guide said was sort of a sister city to Boring, Oregon.
Yeah. I have been to Boring, Oregon. Very briefly.
Yes.
I believe I just drove through it. I saw you first in February. And then whispering, our companions are excessively stupid. What shall we do to rouse them? Any nonsense will serve. They shall talk. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse, who, wherever she is, presides, to say that she desires to know what you are all thinking of. Some laughed and answered good-humoredly. Miss Bates said a great deal. Mrs. Elton swelled at the idea of Miss Woodhouse's presiding. Mr. Knightley's answer was the most distinct. Is Miss Woodhouse sure she would like to hear what we are all thinking of? Oh, no, cried Emma, laughing as carelessly as she could. Upon no account in the world. It is the very last thing I could stand the brunt of just now. Let me hear anything rather than what you are all thinking of. I will not say quite all. There are 1 or 2, perhaps, glancing at Mr. Weston and Harriet, whose thoughts I might not be afraid of knowing. It is a sort of thing, cried Mrs. Elton emphatically, which I should not have thought myself privileged to inquire into. Though perhaps as the chaperone of the party, I never was in any circle, exploring parties, young ladies, married women. Her mutterings were chiefly to her husband, and he murmured in reply, Very, very true, my love, very true. Exactly so, indeed. Quite unheard of, but some ladies will say anything. Better pass it off as a joke. Everybody knows what is due to you. So I feel like I read that whole Mrs. Elton speech with the wrong tone, but I think you get what she was getting at. She just wants to be in charge because she thinks being married makes her the most important person.
Yeah.
Which I actually feel like the vibe I've gotten from a lot of other content from this and similar periods is that it was considered that once you were married, you kind of stood back and let the young ladies who needed to like show off, let the other young ladies exhibit. The young unmarried ladies were like the stars of the show. And a married woman should kind of step back a little bit.
I think it depends.
It
highly depends on the context.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know that there
was such a thing as a society I don't know about this time period, but there was such a thing as a society matron.
Sure.
Which wouldn't require being married, actually. It just meant being a more mature woman who was like a chaperone.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think that her being a recently married young woman means she doesn't qualify as a society matron.
No, she wouldn't.
But she seems to think that she should be the star of the show.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Mrs. Weston. She didn't even go. She opted to stay with Mr. Woodhouse.
Yeah.
Like, Mrs. Elton wants everyone to pay attention to her.
Yeah.
Apparently, she thought all the attention paid to her in the first couple of weeks of her being there because she was new and novel and a recent bride. So I think,
Right.
you know, a certain amount of like attention
Yeah.
was due to that.
Yeah.
She thinks that should just continue forever.
Right. Yeah. Like the wedding visits just keep happening.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
visit. Is
Every
a
time
wedding
she walks
visit.
into a room, she's the most interesting person in the room.
Right. Because
It's like, no, you were only interesting because you were new.
Right. Yeah. At some point, you're being married wears off.
Yeah. Yeah.
People get used to it.
She clearly wants to be in charge all the time. She wants to be in charge of Mr. Knightley's party. She bristles at the idea of Miss Woodhouse's presiding over this outing.
Yeah.
Although she did originally plan the outing herself. So I guess she has a little bit of a foot to stand on there. Because she was the one who said, let's go to a picnic at Box Hill.
That's
Originally.
true.
So
Yeah.
I guess we'll give her a little leeway here. Just only a skosh.
Yeah.
And only because Emma's just as ridiculous as she is, just in different ways.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Yes, her husband mutters to her, blah, blah, blah. It will not do, whispered Frank to Emma. They are most of them affronted. I will attack them with more address. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say she waives her right of knowing exactly what you may all be thinking of, and only requires something very entertaining from each of you in a general way. Here are 7 of you, besides myself, who, she is pleased to say, am very entertaining already, and she only demands from each of you either one thing very clever, be it prose or verse, original or repeated, or 2 things moderately clever, or 3 things very dull indeed, and she engages to laugh heartily at them all. Oh, very well, exclaimed Miss Bates. Then I need not be uneasy. 3 things very dull indeed. This will just do for me, you know. I'm sure I shall be sure to say 3 dull things as soon as I ever open my mouth, shan't I? Looking round with the most good-humored dependence on everybody's assent. Do you not all think I shall? Emma could not resist. Ah, Mum, but there may be a difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited as to the number. Only 3 at once. Miss Bates, deceived by the mock ceremony of her manner, did not immediately catch her meaning. But when it burst on her, it could not anger, though a slight blush showed that it could pain her. Ah, well, to be sure. Yes, I see what she means, turning to Mr. Knightley. And I will try to hold my tongue. I must make myself very disagreeable, or she would not have said such a thing to an old friend. I like your plan, cried Mr. Weston. Agreed. I will do my best. I am making a conundrum. How will a conundrum reckon? Low, I am afraid, sir, very low, answered his son. But we shall be indulgent, especially to anyone who leads the way. No, said Emma. It will not reckon low. A conundrum of Mr. Weston shall clear him and his next neighbour. Come, sir, pray let me hear it. I doubt its being very clever myself, said Mr. Weston. It is too much of a matter of fact, but here it is. What 2 letters of the alphabet are there that express affection? Oh, perfection. What 2 letters express perfection? I'm sure I do not know. Ah, you will never guess. You, to Emma, I am certain will never guess. I will tell you. M and A. Emma. Do you understand? Such
It's
a dumb joke.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
Do you want me to? Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. But
Do you want me to explain it again?
Yeah.
It'll be funnier
Shall I
if
go
I
on?
explain it again.
Please don't. He's trying to lighten the mood. Actually, I wonder, is he trying to lighten the mood because he realizes Emma just was really mean to Miss Bates? Or
that his son is being a dick?
Was he? Yeah, and then his son was being kind of a dick. Because yes, we must remember that Miss Woodhouse has claimed none of these things.
Right.
That Mr. Churchill claims that she has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mr. Elton, some young ladies will just say anything. It was Frank who said it.
I like how Frank to Emma says, they're put out by this, therefore, let me continue, but more so.
Yes.
Like, that's a great plan.
Yeah.
When you see that people are upset by your behavior, double down on it.
Yeah.
That always works well.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder, though, was Mr. Weston so focused on trying to figure out his little riddle that he didn't even notice what passed between Emma and Miss Bates? Or is he going, Is it such a bad joke because he had to think of it really quickly? Because he's like, oh no, something bad has happened. I must make everyone friends again.
Yeah.
Could go either way. I'd say that's open to interpretation.
I would put my money on the last one, but it could easily be either.
Understanding and gratification came together. It might be a very indifferent piece of wit, but Emma found a great deal to laugh at and enjoy in it, and so did Frank and Harriet. It did not seem to touch the rest of the party equally. Some looked very stupid about it, and Mr. Knightley greatly said, "This explains the sort of clever thing that is wanted, and Mr. Weston has done very well for himself. But he must have knocked up everybody else. Perfection should not have come quite so soon." For myself, I protest I must be excused," said Mrs. Elton. "I really cannot attempt. I'm not at all fond of that sort of thing. I had an acrostic once sent to me upon my own name, which I was not at all pleased with. I knew who it came from, an abominable puppy. You know who I mean," nodding to her husband. "These kinds of things are very well at Christmas when one is sitting round the fire, but quite out of place, in my opinion, when one is exploring about the country in summer. Miss Woodhouse must excuse me. I am not one of those who have witty things at everybody's service. Now, I do not pretend to be a wit. Good. I have a great deal of vivacity in my own way, but I really must be allowed to judge when to speak and when to hold my tongue. Pass us, if you please, Mr. Churchill. Pass Mr. E., Knightley, Jane, and myself. We have nothing clever to say, not one of us."
Wow, that was kind of presumptuous.
Yeah, well, Mrs. Elton. Wow, that was kind of presumptuous. That's her catchphrase. That's her slogan. I do love it. She's like, "Oh, yeah, Miss Woodhouse must pardon me." Again, it was Frank who proposed this little
Right, yeah.
challenge. Anyway.
It's all very
Also, these things are very well at Christmas around a fire, but totally out of place. You all were sitting around being kind of silent.
Yeah.
I don't entirely blame Frank Churchill for wanting to like
try to lighten
people
the
are
mood
being
a little
all
bit.
boring. Let's lighten the mood. He's being a dick about it, but like
Yeah.
the impulse to be like, well, let's have a little game is not out of place.
Right, yeah.
Yes, pray pass me, added her husband, with a sort of sneering consciousness. I have nothing to say that can entertain Miss Woodhouse, or any other young lady. An old married man, quite good for nothing. Shall we walk, Augusta? With all my heart. I am really tired of exploring so long on one spot. Come, Jane, take my other arm. Jane declined it, however, and the husband and wife walked off. Happy couple, said Frank Churchill, as soon as they were out of hearing. How well they suit one another. Very lucky, marrying as they did upon an acquaintance formed only in a public place. They only knew each other, I think, a few weeks in Bath. Peculiarly lucky. For as to any real knowledge of a person's disposition that Bath or any public place can give, it is all nothing. There can be no knowledge. It is only by seeing women in their own homes, among their own set, just as they always are, that you can form any just judgment. Short of that, it is all guess and luck, and will generally be ill luck. How many a man has committed himself on a short acquaintance and rooted all the rest of his life?
Wow.
That is a loaded speech.
Seriously.
In ways that, I don't know, I've been trying not to like outright say what happens, but like, boy, knowing how everything turns out, that is a loaded speech.
I feel like
it could go either way though.
I really wonder like how the people, I mean, I guess Emma hearing that would just think like, oh, he's just
talking.
Yeah.
Talking nonsense. Yeah.
But seriously, it's
or
hard
that he's just insulting Mr.
hear.
and Mrs. Elton, which she would be down with.
It's true.
Because that's how it plays at first.
Yeah. But I mean, going into such detail, it's
really going on about it.
Yeah. Like it's like, feels like you have a horse in this game, dude.
Yeah. Miss Fairfax, who had seldom spoken before, except among her own confederates, spoke now. Such things do occur, undoubtedly. She was stopped by a cough. Frank Churchill turned towards her to listen. You were speaking, said he gravely. She recovered her voice. I was only going to observe that, though such unfortunate circumstances do sometimes occur, both to men and women, I cannot imagine them to be very frequent. A hasty and imprudent attachment may arise, but there is generally time to recover from it afterwards. I would understand to mean that it can only that it can be only weak, irresolute characters, whose happiness must be always at the mercy of chance, who will suffer an unfortunate acquaintance to be an inconvenience, an oppression forever.
Ooh.
He made no answer, merely looked and bowed in submission, and soon afterwards said in a lively tone, "Well, I have so little confidence in my own judgment that whenever I marry, I hope somebody will choose my wife for me. Will you," turning to Emma, "will you choose a wife for me? I am sure I should like anybody fixed on by you. You provide for the family, you know," with a smile at his father. "Find somebody for me. I am in no hurry. Adopt her, educate her." He's basically saying, "Tell me to marry Harriet." He doesn't realize that's what he's saying, but I'm sure that's what
Basically.
Emma is hearing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
how convenient. Someone I have already adopted and educated is right here.
I also like how
Marry
he
her.
says, "You provide for the family," as if like by having a governess, you brought my
Right.
father a wife.
Right.
Like,
Well, I mean, I am sure he's aware that Emma considers herself as having made that match.
that's true.
He's probably been
So
told
he's,
that
like,
story.
Playing to her
He's
vanity.
yeah, he's kind of if nothing if what was I going? Sorry, I lost track of what I was going to say. At least he is referencing the fact that everyone in town probably knows that Emma considers herself as at least partially responsible
Yeah.
for Mr. Weston and Mrs. Weston getting together. So
Yeah.
he is at least referencing that, and at most flattering Emma.
Ridiculous that might be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if there was no Emma, Miss Taylor might have never come to Highbury. It's not-
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could,
She's-
if you want to look at it that
yeah.
way. Sure.
Anyway, gosh, I can't help but I sort of do wish that I could have read this book without having seen an adaptation of it
Yeah.
to know, like, this seems so pointed.
Yeah.
I can't imagine getting to this point in the book and not suspecting. I guess once Mr. Knightley suspects it, you would start to suspect it too.
I think so.
Even if
yeah.
you'd been totally, it had never occurred to you. As soon as Mr. Knightley's like, hang
Yeah.
on a minute.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then this scene makes it.
Although, yeah, Mr. Knightley is not, I don't think he suspects how long it's been going on.
Oh, sure. No. Yeah, I agree. He might even think that he's rebounding from Emma
yeah.
skirting him.
Yeah. He's looking at it as Frank sort of cheating on Emma. Quote unquote.
Which I don't know why. He should be glad that he's no longer focused on Emma, if that was indeed the case.
Well, he's concerned about Emma's feelings. Mr. Knightley is.
Well, that's true. All right.
Because he's hopelessly
yes.
gallant.
Find somebody for me. I am in no hurry. Adopt her. Educate her. And make her like myself? By all means, if you can. Very well. I undertake the commission. You shall have a charming wife. She must be very lively and have hazel eyes. I care for nothing else. I shall go abroad for a couple of years, and when I return, I shall come to you for my wife. Remember. She shall be very lively now. Hazel eyes.
That's
Rich she shall be. That's certain.
Yes.
Handsome, or I'll never look on her. I can't remember the rest of that speech now. You all know what I'm referencing. Or you don't, and you're like, what are you talking about?
No.
And her hair shall be... Oh, whatever color, please God.
It's Shakespeare, though.
Yes, it's from Much Ado About Nothing, when Benedict is like, I will never marry, but if I did marry.
Right.
And then he starts listing a laundry list of requirements for a wife. My favorite part is that I've heard different interpretations of the line, her hair shall be whatever color it please God. I've heard, and her hair shall be... whatever color it please God. Like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to be liberal. I don't care about her hair color.
Yeah.
And then I've read some people say, deliver it as, and her hair shall be whatever color it please God. Just like, I'm just making a statement.
Right.
I kind of like it when it's like, and her hair shall be,
That is more how that sounds.
In the David Tennant and Catherine Tate version, he actually starts to say red. He goes, and her hair shall be whatever color it please God. That was kind of
David Tennant and Catherine Tate. Was that something they did as part of Doctor Who?
No. They were in a stage production of Much Ado.
Oh,
It's on the internet. I think you can watch it.
okay.
That's how I saw it. Obviously,
we're going on a
sorry.
tangent, but that's very
back to
interesting.
Jane Austen.
I would
Fast forward several hundred years. Emma was in no danger of forgetting. It would It was a commission to touch every favorite feeling. Would not Harriet be the very creature described? Hazel Eyes excepted, 2 years more might make her all that he wished. He might even have Harriet in his thoughts at the moment. Who could say? Referring the education to her seemed to imply it. "Now, Mum," said Jane to her aunt, "shall we join Mrs. Elton?" "If you please, my dear, with all my heart. I am quite ready. I am ready to have gone with her. I was ready to have gone with her, but this will do just as well. We shall soon overtake her. There she is. Oh, no, that's somebody else. Oh, that's one of the ladies in the Irish car party. Not at all like her. Well, I declare." They walked off, followed in half a minute by Mr. Knightley. Mr. Weston, his son, Emma, and Harriet only remained, and the young man's spirits now rose to a pitch almost unpleasant. Was he not unpleasant before?
I know, right?
Even Emma grew tired at last of flattery and merriment, and wished herself rather walking quietly about with any of the others, or sitting almost alone, and quite unattended to, in tranquil observation of the beautiful views beneath her. The appearance of the servants looking out for them to give notice of the carriages was a joyful sight, and even the bustle of collecting and preparing to depart, and the solicitude of Mrs. Elton to have her carriage first, were gladly endured, in the prospect of the quiet drive home, which was to close the very questionable enjoyments of this day of pleasure. Such another scheme, composed of so many ill-assorted people, she hoped never to be betrayed into again. While waiting for the carriage, she found Mr. Knightley by her side. He looked around as if to see that no one were near, then said, "Emma, I must once more speak to you, as I have been used to do. A privilege rather endured than allowed, perhaps, but I must still use it. I cannot see you acting wrong without a remonstrance. How can you be so unfeeling to Miss Bates? How could you be so insolent in your wit to a woman of her character, age, and situation? Emma, I had not thought it possible." Emma recollected, blushed, was sorry, but tried to laugh it off. "Nay, how could I help saying what I did? Nobody could have helped it. It was not so very bad. I dare say she did not understand me." "I assure you she did. She felt your full meaning. She has talked of it since. I wish you could have heard how she talked of it, with what candor and generosity. I wish you could have excuse me. I wish you could have heard her honoring your forbearance in being able to pay her such attentions as she was forever receiving from yourself and your father, when her society must be so irksome." "Oh," cried Emma, "I know there is not a better creature in the world, but you must allow that what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her." "They are blended," said he, "I acknowledge, and were she prosperous, I could allow for the occasional prevalence of the ridiculous over the good. Were she a woman of fortune, I would leave her every harmless absurdity to take its chance. I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner. Were she your equal in station. But, Emma, consider how far this is from being the case. She is poor. She has sunk from the comfort she was born to, and if she lived to old age, must probably sink more. Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done indeed. You, whom she has known from an infant, whom she has seen grow up from a period where her notice was an honor, to have you now, in thoughtless spirits and the pride of the moment, laugh at her, humble her, and before her niece, too, and before others, many of whom, certainly some, would be entirely guided by your treatment of her. This is not pleasant to you, Emma. It is very far from pleasant to me, but I will tell you truths while I can, satisfied with proving myself your friend by the very faithful counsel, and trusting that you will some time or other do me greater justice than you can do now." While they talked, they were advancing towards the carriage. It was ready, and before she could speak again, he had handed her in. He had misinterpreted the feelings which had kept her face averted and her tongue motionless. They were combined only of anger against herself, mortification, and deep concern. She had not been able to speak, and on entering the carriage sank back a moment, overcome. Then, reproaching herself for having taken no leave, making no acknowledgment, parting in apparent sullenness, she looked out with voice and hand, eager to show a difference. But it was just too late. He had turned away, and the horses were in motion. She continued to look back, but in vain, and soon, with what appeared unusual speed, they were halfway down the hill, and everything left far behind. She was vexed beyond what could have been expressed, almost beyond what she could conceal. Never had she felt so agitated, mortified, grieved at any circumstance in her life. She was most forcibly struck. The truth of his representation there was no denying. She felt it at his heart. How could she have been so brutal, so cruel to Miss Bates? She could have exposed herself to such ill opinion how could she have exposed herself to such ill opinion in anyone she valued? And how suffer him to leave her without saying one word of gratitude, of concurrence, of common kindness? Time did not compose her. As she reflected more, she seemed to but feel it more. She never had been so depressed. Happily, it was not necessary to speak. There was only Harriet, who seemed not in spirits herself, fagged and very willing to be silent. And Emma felt the tears running down her cheeks almost all the way home, without being at any trouble to check them, extraordinary as they were. Whew. Yeah. Oh, it's an intense chapter.
Heavy. I have to say, I kind of relate to Emma, though. Like, this is when I actually start liking her more.
Yeah, definitely. This is when she's for the first time is really forced to like really take in his criticism, which is absolutely valid.
Yeah.
She knows that it was wrong.
Yeah.
And it was only, the insouciant nature of Frank Churchill that made her go that far, perhaps.
Yeah.
And she needed Mr. Knightley to be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Emma, how very dare.
Yeah.
She's finally having to actually accept that she has done something bad.
But I think we've probably all, I certainly have been in a place where, like, you realize that you are guilty of
oh God, yeah,
something that you can't believe of yourself.
Yeah, that you're like, I now that someone else has pointed it out to me, or now that it's been made clear in some way, that what I did was wrong. You're like, why did I do it? And you honestly don't know. Oh, that is a very unpleasant feeling.
Yes,
I can definitely sympathize with her crying all the way home.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 44. The wretchedness of a scheme to Box Hill was in Emma's thoughts all the evening. How it might be considered by the rest of the party, she could not tell. They, in their different homes and their different ways, might be looking back on it with pleasure, but in her view it was a morning more completely misspent, more totally bare of rational satisfaction at the time, and more to be abhorred in recollection than any she had ever passed. The whole evening of backgammon with her father was felicity to it. There, indeed, lay real pleasure, for there she was giving up the sweetest hours of the 24 to his comfort, and feeling that, unmerited as might the degree of his fond affection and confiding esteem, she could not, in her general conduct, be open to any severe reproach. As a daughter, she hoped she was not without a heart. She hoped no one could have said to her, "How could you be so unfeeling to your father? I will tell you truth while I can." Miss Bates should never again, no, never. If attention in future could do away the past, she might hope to be forgiven. She had been often remiss, her conscience told her so, remiss perhaps more in thought than fact, scornful, ungracious, but it should be so no more. In the warmth of true contrition, she would call upon her the very next morning, and it should be the beginning, on her side, of a regular, equal, kindly intercourse. She was just as determined when the morrow came, and went early that nothing might prevent her. It was not unlikely, she thought, that she might see Mr. Knightley in her way, or perhaps he might come in while she were paying her visit. She had no objection. She would not be ashamed of the appearance of the penitent so justly and truly hers. Her eyes were towards Donwell as she walked, but she saw him not. The ladies were all at home. She had never rejoiced at the sound before, nor ever before entered the passage nor walked up the stairs with any wish of giving pleasure, but in conferring obligation, or of deriving it except in subsequent ridicule. There was a bustle on her approach. A good deal of movement and talking. She heard Miss Bates's voice. Something was to be done in a hurry. The maid looked frightened and awkward, hoped she would be pleased to wait a moment, and then ushered her in too soon. The aunt and niece seemed both escaping into the adjoining room. Jane she had a distinct glimpse of, looking extremely ill, and before the door had shut them out, she heard Miss Bates saying, "Well, my dear, I shall say you are laid down in bed, and I am sure you are ill enough." Poor old Mrs. Bates, civil and humble as usual, looked as if she did not quite understand what was going on. "I am afraid Jane is not very well," said she. This is the first time Mrs. Bates actually gets dialogue in the whole book.
Yeah.
She probably usually just feels like it's not worth the effort to try and talk over her daughter.
Yeah, pretty much.
"I am afraid Jane is not very well," said she, "but I do not know. They tell me she is well. I dare say my daughter will be here presently, Miss Woodhouse. I hope you find a chair. I wish Hetty had not gone. I am very little able. Have you a chair, Mum? Do you sit where you like? I am sure she will be here presently." Emma seriously hoped she would. She had a moment's fear of Miss Bates keeping away from her, but Miss Bates soon came, very happy and obliged. But Emma's conscience told her there was not the same cheerful volubility as before, less ease of look and manner. A very friendly inquiry after Miss Fairfax, she hoped, might lead the way to a return of old feelings. The touch seemed immediate. "Ah, Miss Woodhouse, how kind you are! I suppose you have heard, and you are come to give us joy. This does not seem much like joy, indeed, in me," twinkling away a tear or two, "but it will be very trying for us to part with her, after having had her so long. And she has a dreadful headache just now, writing all the morning. Such long letters, you know, to be written to Colonel Campbell and Mrs. Dixon. 'My dear,' said I, 'you will blind yourself,' for tears were in her eyes perpetually. One cannot wonder. It is a great change, and though she is amazingly fortunate, such a situation, I suppose, as no young woman before ever met with on first going out. Do not think us ungrateful, Miss Woodhouse, for such surprising good fortune," again dispersing her tears. "But, poor dear soul, if you were to see what a headache she has. When one is in great pain, you know, one cannot feel any blessing quite as it may deserve. She is as low as possible. To look at her, nobody would think how delighted and happy she is to have secured such a situation. You will excuse her not coming to you. She is not able. She has gone into her own room. I want her to lie down upon the bed. My dear," said I shall say you are laid down upon the bed. But, however, she is not. She is walking about the room. But now that she has written her letters, she says she will soon be well. She will be extremely sorry to miss seeing you, Miss Woodhouse, but your kindness will excuse her. Now, you were kept waiting at the door. I was quite ashamed, but somehow there was a little bustle, for it so happened that we had not heard the knock, and till you were on the stairs we did not know anybody was coming. 'It is only Mrs. Cole,' said I. 'Depend upon it, no one else would come so early.' 'Well,' said she, 'it must be born some time or other, and it may as well be now.' But then Patty came in and said it was you. 'Oh,' said I, 'it is Miss Woodhouse. I am sure you would like to see her.' 'I can see nobody,' said she, and up she got and would go away, and, well, that was what made us keep you waiting, and extremely sorry and ashamed we are. If you must go, my dear,' said I, 'you must, and I will say you are laid down upon the bed.'" Emma was most sincerely interested. Her heart had been long growing kinder towards Jane, and this picture of her present sufferings acted as a cure of every form of her ungenerous suspicion, and left her nothing but pity. And the remembrance of the less just and less gentle sensations of the past obliged her to admit that Jane might very naturally resolve on seeing Mrs. Cole, or any other steady friend, when she might not bear to see herself. She spoke as she felt, with earnest regret and solicitude, sincerely wishing that the circumstances which she collected from Miss Bates to be now actually determined on, might be as much for Miss Fairfax's advantage and comfort as possible. It must be a severe trial to them all. She had understood it was to be delayed till Colonel Campbell's return. "Yes, so very kind," replied Miss Bates, "but you are always kind." There was no bearing such an always, and to break through her dreadful gratitude, Emma made a direct inquiry. "Where, may I ask, is Miss Fairfax going?" "To a Mrs. Smallridge, charming woman, most superior, to have the charge of her 3 little girls, delightful children. Impossible that any situation could be more replete with comfort, if we except, perhaps, Mrs. Suckling's own family, and Mrs. Bragg's. But Mrs. Smallridge is intimate with both, and in the very same neighbourhood. Lives only 4 miles from Maple Grove. Jane will be only 4 miles from Maple Grove." Mrs. Elton, I suppose, has been the person to whom Miss Fairfax owes. Oh, yes, how good Mrs. Elton. The most indefatigable, true friend. She would not take denial. She would not let Jane say no.
Yes, we know.
She absolutely ignores consent. Such a good friend. She would not let Jane say no, for when Jane first heard of it was the day before yesterday, the very morning we were all at Donwell. When Jane first heard of it, she was quite decided against accepting the offer, and for the reasons you mentioned, and exactly as you say, she had made up her mind to close with nothing till Colonel Campbell's return, and nothing should induce her to enter into any engagement at present. And so she told Mrs. Elton. Over and over again. I'm sure I had no more idea she would change her mind. But that good Mrs. Elton, whose judgment never fails her, saw farther than I did. It is not everybody that would have stood out in such a kind way as she did and refused to take Jane's answer. But she positively declared she would not write any such denial yesterday as Jane wished her. She would wait. And sure enough, yesterday evening it was all settled that Jane should go. Quite a surprise to me. It was not the least idea. I had not the least idea. Jane took Mrs. Elton aside and told her at once that upon thinking over the advantages of Mrs. Suckling's situation, she had come to the resolution of accepting it. I do not know a word of it till it was settled. That must be, they must have meant Mrs. Smallridge. That must be it.
Yeah, because, yeah.
The adventures of Mrs. Smallridge's situation.
Yeah.
You spent the evening with Mrs. Elton? Yes, all of us. Mrs. Elton would have us come. It was settled so on the hill while we were walking about with Mr. Knightley. You must all spend your evening with us, said she. I positively must have you all come. Mr. Knightley was there too, was he? No, not Mr. Knightley. He declined it from the first, and though I thought he would come because Mrs. Elton declared she would not let him off, he did not. But my mother and Jane and I were all there, and a very agreeable evening we had. Such kind friends, you know, Miss Woodhouse. One must always find agreeable, though everybody seemed rather fagged after the morning's party. That's supposed to be short for fatigued, fagged.
Yeah.
Like, I knew it meant tired, but this is the first time it occurred to me because it was written right above fatigued on the next line.
Yeah.
Seems, I've always thought of it as rather more like slang, so I'm surprised to hear someone of Miss Bates's age saying it.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it in print too, because I've heard a lot of people misquote it as fat.
Yeah.
And like when
I'm
Lydia,
so fat
when Lydia
straw breath.
Yeah, when Lydia says it.
Yeah. I always thought she was saying fat in the miniseries.
Oh, really? See,
yeah.
I always heard it as fagged, but then I couldn't find proof of it.
I'm so fat. Yeah, I thought it was, I ate too much. That's all I thought it meant.
I mean, that would be reasonable considering it's Lydia.
Yeah, because she's like sprawled out like, oh.
And she's
I'm
always
so
eating.
fat.
Like she's depicted as always eating.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. So, no, I found out fairly recently, I feel like, that it was fagged. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So
anyway,
I'm glad that she uses it in other contexts.
Yes.
That
and this is the second time
justifies
it's been used.
My initial inclination.
Yeah, this is the second time it's been used two chapters in a row.
Yeah.
Even pleasure, you know, is fatiguing, and I cannot say that any of them seemed very much to have enjoyed it. However, I shall always think it a very pleasant party, and feel extremely obliged to the kind friends who included me in it. Miss Fairfax, I suppose, though you were not aware of it, had been making up her mind the whole day. I dare say she had. Whenever the time may come, it must be unwelcome to her and all her friends, but I hope her engagement will have every alleviation that is possible. I mean, as to the character and manners of the family. Oh, thank you, dear Miss Woodhouse. Yes, indeed, there is everything in the world that can make her happy in it. Except the Sucklings and the Braggs, there is not such another nursery establishment so liberal and elegant in all Mrs. Elton's acquaintance. Mrs. Smallridge, a most delightful woman, a style of living almost equal to Maple Grove, and as to the children, except the little Sucklings and little Braggs, there is not such sweet, little, elegant, sweet children anywhere. Jane will be treated with such regard and kindness. It will be nothing but pleasure, a life of pleasure. And her salary, I really cannot venture to name her salary to you, Miss Woodhouse. Even you, used to it as you are of great sums, would hardly believe that so much could be given to a young person like Jane. Ah, madam, cried Emma, if other children are at all like what I remember to have been myself, I should think 5 times the amount of what I have ever yet heard named as a salary on such occasions dearly earned. You are so noble in your ideas,
She's not wrong.
And when is Miss Fairfax to leave you? Oh, very soon indeed. That's the worst of it. Within a fortnight. Mrs. Smallridge is in a great hurry. My poor mother does not know how to bear it. So then I try to put it out of her thoughts and say, come, Mum, do not let us think about it any more. Her friends must all be sorry to lose her. And will not Colonel and Mrs. Campbell be sorry to find that she has engaged herself before their return? Yes, Jane says she is sure they will, but yet this is such a situation that she cannot feel herself justified in declining. I was so astonished when she first told me that she had been saying to Mrs. Elton, and what Mrs. Elton at the same moment came congratulating me upon it. It was before tea. No, it could not be before tea, because we were just going to cards. Yet it was before tea, because I remember thinking, oh no, now I recollect. Now I have it. Something happened before tea, but not that. I'm sorry. Me. How many times have I gotten derailed on a story? Because I'm like, no, it couldn't have been Thursday. Because Thursday was the... Okay, no. Okay, sorry. Something else happened Thursday. Anyway, What was I talking about? Yes, Wednesday is what happened. Yes, we are all a little bit Miss Bates sometimes.
Yes.
Something happened before tea, but not that. Mr. Elton was called out of the room before tea. Old John Adley's son wanted to speak with him. Poor old John, I have great regard for him. He was clerk to my old father 27 years, and now, poor old man, he's bedridden, and very poorly with the rheumatic gout in his joints. I must go and see him today, and so will Jane, I am sure, if she gets out at all. Then poor John's son came to talk with Mr. Elton about relief from the parish. He is very well to do himself, you know, being head man at the Crown, ostler, and everything of that sort. But still he cannot keep his father without some help. And so when Mr. Elton came back, he told us what John Ostler had been telling him. And then it came out about the shares having been sent to Randall's to take Mr. Frank Churchill to Richmond. That was what happened before tea. It was after tea that Jane spoke to Mrs. Elton. So that is actually... I thought it was just going to be a funny line about her. Something else happened anyway, but no, that is actually significant.
Yes, it is.
Miss Bates would hardly give Emma time to say how perfectly new this circumstance was to her, but as without supposing it possible that she could be ignorant of any of the particulars of Mr. Frank Churchill's going, she proceeded to give them all. It was a... But as, without supposing it possible that she could be ignorant of any of the particulars of Mr. Frank Churchill's going, she proceeded to give them all. It was of no consequence. I'm sorry. I tried twice and I can't parse that sentence.
She proceeded to give them all, being all the particulars.
Yeah, but then it says, comma, it was of no consequence.
Oh,
yeah. That's the part I don't understand. The rest of it seemed perfectly sensible. And I started again, and then I went, nope, I'm still lost. I think it's just she proceeded to give them all. It was of no consequence. And she sometimes uses a comma where a semicolon or even a period might do better.
Right, yeah. I've noticed that with some other writings from about older writings.
Different styles.
Yeah.
What Mr. Elton had learned from the ostler on the subject, being the accumulation of the ostler's own knowledge, and the knowledge of the servants at Randall's, was that a messenger had come over from Richmond soon after the return of the party from Box Hill, which messenger, however, had been no more than was expected, and that Mr. Churchill had sent his nephew a few lines containing, upon the whole, a tolerable account of Mrs. Churchill, and only wishing him not to delay coming back beyond the next morning early, but that Mr. Frank Churchill, having resolved to go home directly, without waiting at all, and his horse seeming to have got a cold, Tom had been sent off immediately for the Crown chaise, and the ostler had stood out and seen it pass by, the boy going a good pace and driving very steady. And now we have a very important illustration of the Crown chaise going by. It's just very important.
Very important.
Oh,
I want to see the horse having a cold.
Wow, 3 different people came and went from the Instagram today. Lately, nobody's been in the Instagram.
Yeah.
But none of them said anything. And I have the pinned comments, so they could come over to the YouTube if they really wanted to, but they clearly don't.
Yes.
Rude. Anyway. Where was I? The chaise went by. It was driving steady. There was nothing in all this either to astonish or interest, and it caught Emma's attention only as it united with the subject which already engaged her mind. The contrast between Mrs. Churchill's importance in the world and Jane Fairfax's struck her. One was everything, the other nothing, and she sat musing on the difference of woman's destiny, and quite unconscious on what her eyes were fixed, till roused by Miss Bates's saying, I see what you are thinking of, the pianoforte. What is to become of that? Very true. Poor dear Jane was talking of it just now. You must go, said she. You and I must part. You will have no business here. Let it stay, however, said she. Give it house room till Colonel Campbell comes back. I shall talk to him about it. I will talk about it to him. He will settle for me. He will help me out of all my difficulties. And to this day, I do believe she knows not whether it was his present or his daughter's. No woman was obliged to think of the pianoforte, and the remembrance of all her formal, fanciful, and unfair conjectures was so little pleasing that she soon allowed herself to believe her visit had been long enough, and with a repetition of everything she could venture to say of the good wishes which she really felt, took leave. Yeah, I guess you wouldn't take a pianoforte with you.
No.
The family probably already has one. If
They
they're that
probably
well
do,
off.
and it would probably be seen as presumptuous.
Well, yeah,
tried,
if they didn't
which-
have a pianoforte, it might be awkward for her to bring one.
Yeah.
Because it's not normal for someone of her position to own their own pianoforte.
Right.
Anyway, that is the end of the chapter. She'll move on to chapter 45 tomorrow. Things are really, really starting to hot up in this story.
Yes.
We still have about 10 chapters left, so. Although I always forget that in the books, there's always a few chapters after what is the ending of a movie or TV show.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The movie or TV show always ends with the most exciting moment, usually a wedding.
Right.
And then the books always have like another chapter or two of kind of wrapping up the other details. So.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for listening. Again, if for some reason you've listened to this, you found this video first, I should say this at the beginning instead of at the end, but anyway, the rest of the chapters are in the playlist, so you can hear the rest of the book leading up to this point. It's probably a bit too late for anyone to actually catch up unless you just listen to all of the episodes non-stop. It'd be difficult for you to catch up to the live videos. However, I expect us to only have a few more, although we did have that one chapter yesterday that was just super long. So
Yeah, it's true.
We'll see. I only expect us to have a few more days left. And then we will be done. And then I will be taking a break. So if you have any suggestions about what you would like to hear me read in the future, if you are interested in having me continue this, if you have opinions about what book it should be or just what type of book, something similar to this, something very different from this, whatever. Otherwise,
something very different.
Otherwise, I shall just decide whatever suits me. So, and on that note, have a good evening, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you in the future.